Chapter 1. Meet Ted and Greg. Ted and Greg were born to be best friends, or worst enemies. They were born into two loving families just 6 days apart. Their parents lived next door to each other. The babies started their lives practically in the same house as their parents were the best of friends. Ted and Greg were sitting staring into space. You could tell that they were both angry. Neither one had said a word since they sat down on this bench in Ted's backyard. They lived next door to each other. The parents had been friends long before they were born. The parents weren't rich, but had always had good jobs and were able to buy their houses next door to each other. Their mortgages were sustainable. As Ted and Greg grew up, they were taught right from wrong. When they were about 8, they were allowed to help mow their lawns. Not long after that, they were doing all the mowing and upkeep of their lawns, with a little help from their parents. When they were about 10 or 11, they started mowing lawns for their neighbors, and by 12, they had their own business, mowing lawns for everyone on their block as well as across the street. At 14, they had saved up enough money between them to buy a computer that they really wanted. They went to Ted's mother's, as she was the easiest to persuade, and asked if they could buy it. When she asked about the money, she realized they had combined their savings just to get one computer. She went to Ted's dad and told him what was going on. He called the boys together and went next door to talk to Greg's parents. After a lot of discussion about where they were going to set it up and the amount of time each would spend on it, the dads took the two teens to the local computer store. The boys did not hesitate. They knew exactly what they wanted, even when they were shown cheaper ones that they were told were just as good. They had spent a lot of time studying computers. After everything was loaded in the cart and they were on their way to the checkout, Greg's dad told them to wait, as he needed to get something. When he came back, he had a shopping cart with another computer on it. He and Ted's dad had decided to go halves on another computer so that both boys would have their own computer. That was the start of their learning. They continued the yard mowing and maintenance of their neighbors' lawns. They made more in a week than they could at any other job in the area that they could work. By the time they graduated from high school, they each had completed 6 college subjects and several online subjects. Their parents were very proud of them and always let them know it. By the time they were 20, they had graduated college. They both knew they wanted to be astronauts, and that was why they were so angry sitting here. They had applied for the astronaut program and taken all the written tests and all the physical tests. They took the course and graduated. They took the final physical and passed. They knew they had passed everything. Then they went to the review board. They had been told what a wonderful job they had done on everything. But they were too young, and they had to be at least 25. For two young men who had done so well all their lives, this was a devastating blow. They were unprepared for it. They just didn't know how to handle such disappointment. They sat for hours trying to decide what to do now. They didn't like feeling sorry for themselves. It just didn't feel good. Greg says, "I feel like beating somebody up, but I don't know who to hit. I don't want to hurt anyone." Ted says, "You know it's our own fault. We should have checked the requirements more closely." Greg says, "I know, but that only makes it hurt worse." They went home and told Ted's family first, as they would be most likely to take it in stride. Greg's dad would hit the overhead and want to do something drastic to the review board. They needed Ted's dad to help break the news. It was a little strange that Ted and his dad were completely opposite in that respect, as were Greg and his dad. As they expected, when they told Greg's dad, he started for his gun. It took all of them to calm him down. After he was calmed down, he said, "You know, it's funny in a way that Ted and Greg had worked so hard to finish all their schooling and missed out on a lot just to get into the program, only to find they were too young." They discussed what to do next. The only thing they could come up with was a job, but not what kind of job. Ted could take more classes on mapping and Greg could go for his doctor's degree. Ted said, "Well, we made a good living mowing lawns. Maybe we should branch out and do it every day." Greg said, "I don't think so. By the time we're old enough to get into the program, our backs will have given out." That night, Greg heard a pecking on his window. It was the signal that they used to use as teens, so they could get into each other's rooms. He went to the window, and there was Ted. He opened the window and motioned for Ted to come in. Ted shook his head and said very quietly, "Meet me out back." Greg climbed out the window and followed Ted to the very backyard behind the shed. They sat down on a bench that had been put there years ago so they could get some time away from their sisters. They each had 2 younger sisters, which could really be a pain at times. Greg asks, "What's going on? I was nearly asleep. Couldn't it wait till morning?" Ted says, "Just be quiet and listen to what I have to say before you say anything. Can you do that, please?" Greg nodded that he could. Ted says, "There is a spaceship taken off to outer space, leaving at 5 Sunday afternoon." Greg says, "I know that. What of it?" Ted says, "Wait, I'm not finished. We are going to be on it." Greg asked, "What have you been drinking or smoking? They won't let us on that ship." "I told you, just listen. I know all the codes and keywords, and you do too. Why can't we just sneak aboard?" Greg looks at him and says, "You are serious. You know we would be arrested, and any future chance we have will be gone. They won't catch us. I know the perfect place to hide." Greg replies, "The only place to hide is one of the storerooms, as all the rest have cameras and surveillance equipment. Once in space, there's no air in them, and the pressure's very light." "Yes, but I know the one with all the extra spacesuits. All we must do is get in, put on a suit, and wait until we are out in space. And then we can find another place to hide. I think the extra pantry would be perfect, as they won't be using it for a while, and it's pressurized with oxygen." Greg says, "Sooner or later, we will be caught." "So what? We will be in space. What can they do? Turn around and bring us back?" Greg says, "They could put us in the brig or toss us overboard. That would be cruel. The brig is only big enough for one, and it would be murder if they tossed us overboard." Greg says, "Not if no one told. And when do you think you can pull this off?" "We leave here early Sunday morning, and when we get there, we wait for the changing of the guards just before daylight. Then we slip in. No one will be watching at that time of day." Greg asked, "How do you know this?" "I've been doing a lot of research lately, hoping to use it as part of our training. You can never know too much." Greg replies, "You've been hacking their systems, haven't you?" "Yes, and a good thing. Now, I know how to get us on board." Greg looks at him and shakes his head. "I haven't agreed to do this." "You must. We always do things together. You know you like the idea." Greg replies, "You're wrong. I don't like the idea. I love it, but I don't think we can pull it off. And what about our families? They will never go along with this. I bet your dad would. I don't intend to tell him." Greg looks at him and asks, "You're just going to let them think we disappeared?" "No, that would be cruel. We would leave them a note in the truck. We would be long gone by then." Greg frowns. "I just thought of something else. What if the flight is scrubbed after we are on board? How do we get off before we are missed? What could cause them to scrub it? Look at the weather for the next 2 weeks. It's perfect. Greg says, I don't think you've thought this through. There could be many malfunctions that could cause a delay or worse. This plan just has too many flaws. Well, flaws or not, I'm going, with or without you. And I hope if you don't go, you will keep quiet. Greg says, okay, we can discuss it more tomorrow. It's late, and our first 2 lawns are at 8. Okay, see you at 7:30. They were up early. Neither one had slept much. Greg felt angry at Ted, but decided to forget it. After he ate, he felt better. They went to get their lawnmowers and equipment. Ted asked, Did you decide? Greg answers, No, and I would rather not discuss it now. They went to start their jobs. They were finished before 10:30 because Mrs. Brown didn't have enough money to pay them and refused to let them mow. They tried to convince her that they would come back next week for the money, but she still said no. She was like that. They had tried to tell her it messed up their schedule, but she said she couldn't help it. They were standing on the sidewalk starting to discuss the trip. Greg said we should go someplace and discuss it, not on the sidewalk where everyone could hear us. It was a good thing they were just staring at each other as Greg's mom walked out and handed them a bottle of water and asked, What's wrong? Greg replied, Nothing, Mom. Just Mrs. Brown didn't have the money and wouldn't let us mow. I think we should just mow it, and Ted won't do it. Greg's mom said, You know how she is, so you either have to do it her way or not at all. Greg says, Oh, I know. It's just so hard to fit her in some days. Ted says, Let's get cleaned up and go get a hamburger. Greg's mom says, I can fix you both a sandwich. Ted replies, That's nice of you, but we wanted to go to that new place outside of town and see how they are. They had not discussed this, but Greg decided to just go along with Ted. He hoped they could get all this straightened out, but he was afraid the only way to do it was for him to agree to go with Ted. He wasn't sure he could do that. Greg went out and started his car and waited on Ted. Ted finally came out and said, Let's take my truck. I have an idea. Greg didn't argue, just got out and turned off his engine, locked his car, and climbed into Ted's truck. They didn't say a word all the way to the new hamburger joint. They ordered at the drive-thru, and Ted drove to the back of the parking lot. As they sat eating, neither one of them said a word. Finally, Ted asks, Are we going to just sit here? Or are we going to make plans? Or are you going to say you're not going? Greg says, That's a long question. As much as I would like to go with you, I don't think I have the nerves to take on that kind of a trip. Well, I'm going, whether you are or not. How are you going to get along without me? Then he laughs and says, I want you to go. I need you to go. I don't know if I can do it alone. Chances of my getting caught are much greater without you. Guess I better take you home. I don't want to tell you anymore. I don't want you to have to lie too much after I'm gone. So, what you don't know is better for you and me. Greg says, The best thing is that neither one of us goes. Ted says, Well, I'm going, unless I get caught trying. He starts the truck, but Greg removes the keys from the engine and says, Okay, let's go over the details. Are you saying you're going, or do you just want all the details so you can stop me? Greg says, Yes, I'm going. That's what all this is about. You knew if you made me feel guilty enough, I would agree to go. Ted says, No, I hadn't even thought of it that way. You know, you were never a good liar. Ted grins and says, Okay, let's go shopping. There are a few things that we need. Thought you said we had to travel light. Ted says, That's right, but there are several things I need to make it happen. They went to the store and bought a lot of snacks and a few small cans of soft drinks and some small bottles of juices. James, one of the guys they usually played games with once a week, came over and asked, "Hey, are you guys having a party? I didn't get an invitation." Greg says, "Oh, this is for the beach party for our little sisters. We always try to give all 4 of them one each year. We are a little early this year, and we aren't sure where we will be working later." James replies, "Oh, I heard what happened with the space jobs. That really was a bad break. Why did they let you go through all that training if you couldn't work there?" Greg replied, "I guess to get our money." "Okay, we should all get together before you go to any job you get. See you later." Ted says, "I couldn't think of anything to say. I hadn't expected to see anyone we knew." "Well, for once I got the drop on you." When they were back in the truck, Ted asked, "Do you know where our briefcases are? And how about that old camera we used to play jokes with? Is it still around?" "They are with all that junk we used over the years. I assume we will be doing some role-playing?" Ted replies, in a word, yes. "Do you think we can sneak back to the shed without everyone seeing us and asking questions?" "I doubt it, but we can try. We can say we were going to dress up like bums and ask for handouts." "You're funny." They didn't see anyone when they got home. Ted had hidden all their purchases under a tarp in the back of the truck. They went to the shed and moved things around until they found 2 really old briefcases, a camera, and a big camera bag. Ted checked the camera, and it still worked. In the bag there were several rolls of film and flashbulbs. Greg asked, "What are you going to do with the camera?" Ted says with a grin, "We can't be reporters without a working camera." He took a lot of stuff out of the bag and said, "Now there's room for some of those snacks. We will use the briefcases for the rest and a couple of changes of clothes. Be sure to put in extra socks and undies." Greg looked at him and said, "You really have this planned out." Ted says, "Looking a little worried?" "I hope so." Greg asked, "We won't be able to say goodbye to anyone, will we?" Ted says, "Oh, don't go sentimental on me. We will say goodbye to them when we leave in the morning. Just tell them to have a good time at the beach. Mom says they'll be going in the afternoon." Greg asked, "Now, what do we do after we get through the main gates?" "We hide out until the reporters start coming in through the gates. They will need to show IDs. That's why we slipped through earlier. Then we'll just mingle with them until they get to the viewing area, and we slip away. And I know the secret way into the spaceship from there. Then we hide and wait." Greg replies, "That's going to be a long day of hiding and waiting." Ted replies, "Well, it'll be worth it if it works. And I'm sure it will. Just keep your fingers crossed."